We'll be learning how to factor trinomials when a is not 1. So the previous lesson we learned how to factor trinomials when it was just x squared plus bx plus c. Now we're going to have a coefficient here out in front of x squared. So we need to list the factor pairs of the product of a times c. So we're going to multiply a times c, and what that is, we're going to find the factors of them. We're going to determine which factors of a and c add up to b or b, just like before. We call those factors m and p. We use those two factors, m and p, to write the trinomial as 4 terms. So we're breaking up this middle term into 2 separate terms. So 2 factor pairs. So the 2 factors of a times c that add up to b are going to go as m and p, but we always put an x with it. So we have ax squared plus our factor mx plus our factor px plus c. So now we have 4 terms. And when we have 4 terms, we learn to factor by grouping. So then we're just going to factor by grouping and then we'll be done. So if you do not remember how to factor by grouping, go back to the video on how to factor by grouping and brush up on that. So let's look at an example. We have 2x squared plus 9x plus 4. So we have to multiply a and c. So 2 times 4. And 2 times 4 is 8. So we need to find factors of 8. And our factors of 8 are 1 and 8, and 2 and 4. So, what combination, if we add or subtract these, will get our middle term b? If we do positive 1 plus positive 8, we get 9. So we're going to break up this middle term with our 2 factors of 1 and 8. So, we're just going to rewrite our first term, 2x squared. Then instead of 9x, we're going to do plus 1. Always have our variable with it. And then our other factor, plus 8, because it's a positive, with our variable. And then just bring down our constant 4. So all we did was broke up our middle term here. Now we have 4 terms, so we factor by grouping. So we look at the first 2 terms and factor it, and then look at the second 2 terms and factor. When we factor, we're going to look at the greatest common factor of these 2 terms. So look at the numbers 2 and 1. The greatest number you can take out of that would be 1, which we don't need to write 1, but if you'd like to, you can write 1. Then look at the variable. X squared and x. The smallest amount of x's you can take out of both of them would just be 1 of them. So greatest common factor is x. So when we divide it out, what are we left with? We still have a 2. We take 1x out, we're still left with 1x here. Now to this term. If we just take an x out, we do not have any more x's, so we still have our plus 1. So that's that factor there. And we do the same thing for this side over here. Greatest common factor between 8x and 4. So let's look at the numbers, 8 and 4. The greatest number you can divide out of both of them evenly would be 4. So we're going to do plus 4. Then can we take out of any variables here? We have an x here, but we don't have any here, so we cannot. We're just taking out a 4. So we divide 8 by 4, we get 2, and then we're not taking any x's, so we have to bring down our x. And then 4 divided by 4 is 1, so plus 1. So here's a good way to check. Are your two parentheses the same? If they are, you factored correctly. So you're going to rewrite the outside makes 1 parentheses. So we have x plus 4 as 1 parentheses for one of your factors. And then you rewrite the other parentheses, just one of them, as 2x plus 1. And then you just factored when a trinomial when your a is not a 1. You can always check yourself by FOILing, multiplying it out, or using box method as well. Let's do some practice problems on the back. So I would like you to try these on yourself by pausing, but you can always check back to make sure that you did them correctly. So we start with multiplying our first and our last term, 2 times 2. That gives us 4. So we need to find factors of 4. 1 and 4, and 2 and 2. What combination of these factors, if we add or subtract them, then we get 5? Our only possible is 1 and 4, 1 plus 4. So we're going to separate 5x into 2 separate factors. So we write 2x squared plus 1x plus 4x, and then we write our constant, plus 2. Oops. Some of you might be wondering, can we write 4 first and then the 1? The order here doesn't matter. When you go on and factor by grouping, you'll end up with the same 2 ending binomials. So let's factor by grouping here. Look at the first 2. What's the greatest common factor you can take out of here? That would be x. We divide out an x. What are you left with? In this first term, you're left with only the 2x. In the second term here, you're left with just a positive 1. Now let's look at the second 2 terms. What's the greatest common factor you can take out of here? And that would be a 2. 2 can divide into both of those terms, and that's the largest number that can divide. So if we factor out a 2, we're left with a 2x for that first term, and then a positive 1. Now double check to make sure your inside parentheses match, which they do, and rewrite the outside and then one of the insides. So our first factor is x plus 2. And our second factor is 2x plus 1. Okay, now let's look at this next problem. 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. Let's multiply our first and our last term. 3 times 2 is 6. So we need to find factors of 6. 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. What combination of these factors can we add or subtract to give us our negative 7? So negative 1 times or minus 6. So negative 1 minus 6 gives us negative 7. Negative 1 times negative 6 gives us positive 6. Those are our two factors. So instead of our middle term, we're going to split that up into two terms. So rewrite your first term, 3x squared minus 1x minus 6x plus 2. Now factor by grouping. Look at the first two terms. What's your greatest common factor here? Your greatest common factor is going to be x. If you divide out an x, you're left with 3 x minus 1 and then let's look at your second. What's the greatest common factor here? Your greatest common factor between these two terms is going to be 2. So if we do plus 2, that would leave your first term a negative 3x, which does not match over here. So we need to take out a negative 2. So if we take out a negative 2, negative 6x divided by negative 2 gives us a positive 3x. And negative 2 divided by 2 gives us a negative 1. So our two terms, or two binomials inside our parentheses, match. We have 3x minus 1 for both. So we rewrite the terms on the outside, x minus 2, and then rewrite one of the parentheses. And then you factored it. Look at the next one. 4x squared plus 8x minus 5. Multiply 4 times 5, and that is 20. We need factors of 20. 1 and 20. 2 and 10. Excuse me. And 4 and 5. So we need factors of 20, but it's going to be negative 20 because 4 times negative 5. That add or subtract to give us positive 8. So what combination can we get 8? So here, we could get 8 by 2 and 10. So if we do 10 minus 2, we get 8. And then 4 plus 5 would be 9. That wouldn't work. So let's see. Do minus 2 plus 10. That would be our factor. You can substitute that in for your middle term. So rewrite everything else as it is. Instead of your middle term, write your two factor terms. Again, order does not matter here. You could have had 10x first and then 2x second. But make sure you have the correct signs with it. That does matter. Now factor by grouping. Greatest common factor here between 4x squared and negative 2x. So 4 and 2, greatest common factor would be 2. X squared and x. The most amount of x's you can take out of both would just be 1. So greatest common factor here is 2x. And then what are you left with? If you take out 2x, 4 divided by 2 is 2. X squared divided by x. If you take 1x out, you're still left with 1x. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then x, when you take out an x, you don't have any x's left. So then we still have the negative, so it'd be minus 1. Let's look at our second side. We have 10x minus 5. What's the greatest common factor here? Between 10 and 5. Greatest common factor would be 5. So plus 5. If you factor out a 5, you're left with 2x minus 1. So look at your two binomials inside your parentheses. Are they the same? Which they are. You factored correctly. So rewrite the outside. 2x plus 5. And then 2x minus 1. Next one. Multiply your first and your last term. So 6 times 6. And that is our lovely 36. Factors of 36. 1 and 36. 2 and 18. 3 and 12. 4 and 9. And then 6 and 6. We need factors of 36 that add or subtract to give us negative 13. So that's going to be minus 4. So negative 4 minus 9. Sorry, Grayson is very talkative right now, aren't you? So we are going to rewrite it instead of the middle term. So 6x squared minus 4x minus 9x plus 6. Factor by grouping. Greatest common factor between the first two terms is going to be 2x and what are you left with would be 3x minus 2. Greatest common factor between the last two terms is going to be negative 3. And it's negative because we want the signs inside the parentheses to be the same. So if you did positive 3, you would end up having opposite signs here. So then when you go back to change, it'd be -3. And then we'd have 3x -2. Your two binomials are the same, so you did it correctly right at the outside. 2x -3. And then 3x -2. Okay. Our last two problems, let's look at these. Multiply first and last term, 2 times -6, and that is 12, technically -12. Factors of 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So what combination can you add or subtract to get 3? Let's think about this. 1 and 12, there's no way. 2 and 6, again, there's no way. 3 and 4, no combination. So since there's no combination of any way to get that middle term, this problem is prime. There is no way to factor it. This is as much you can do with the process we have done. In Math 2, you will learn how to factor problems like these that you cannot factor the nice way. Our last problem. Multiply your first and your last term. 10 times 15. And that gives us 150. A nice large number. Let's find all of those factors. Yeah, Grace wants to find all the factors. 1 and 150. 2 and 75. 3 and 50. 5 and 30. 6 and 25. 7 doesn't go in. 8 doesn't go in. 9 does not go in, but 10 does. And 10 would be our last factor. 10 and 15. So what combination can we add or subtract here to get us -19, that when we multiply it, it gets us -150. And that's going to be +6 minus 25. Or -25 plus 6. So we're going to substitute those factors into the middle term. So write the first term, 10x squared plus 6x minus 25x minus 15. Factor by the greatest common factor of the first two terms. And that's going to be 2x and then what are we left with would be 5x plus 3. Now factor the next two terms. The greatest common factor there is -5. And what you left with would be 5x plus 3. And our two binomials are the same, so we factored correctly. So we rewrite the two terms on the outside, 2x minus 5 times 5x plus 3. And then we're done. And that's how you factor trinomials when A is not 1. And I do apologize for Grayson being very talkative today.